We're about to start the second weekend of Know Your Liberty. We're in the Christ Evangelical Church in Orem, Utah. And we have an exciting moment here because we have the oldest and the youngest members of the class that I've ever had participate. In front of the camera right now we have Luke Fletcher Misbach and Richard Martin Pratt. Richard Martin Pratt is 96 years old. He's in his 97th year. And when Luke started this class, he was just 3 weeks old. And we've never had that kind of extreme range before. And so when we make this DVD next week, we'll put this little runner on it, this little runner at the front, so that you can see the oldest and the youngest. And we might add also that Luke's mother, Story, is the chairman of this event, and she helped to coordinate and put this all together, for which we're very thankful.
Thank you.
Last week we left off talking about some prominent men. Now these prominent men were Nathan Dane, Joseph Story, and Daniel Webster. Another prominent man, one that I love and respect, said, "Beware of false educational ideas, beware of the flattery of prominent men, and beware of sexual impurity." Three things that can bring a nation down. Now those three things, at least one of the three, two of the three, we had prominent men who were passing along false educational ideas. Now they may have been good men. I'm not going to argue whether they were good or bad. All I'm saying is they passed on some false educational ideas. And those ideas brought the nation down. Now we're going to, I was corrected last week after the presentation, and I welcome correction. I misconstrued a word. I misconstrued the word construe. When we spoke of Joseph's story last week, I mentioned some of the highlights of his life. One of them was he was the most learned scholar ever to sit on the Supreme Court. Another one from the Encyclopedia Britannica, well that one wasn't, the next one is, he was the Dane Professor of Law at Harvard, and he construed the Constitution in favor of expanding federal power. Now it's not wrong to construe something. That's the correction I got. It's that he construed it in favor of something that wasn't true. Do you remember from last week's presentation, what was the primary objection that those states had where they debated in the ratifying conventions at the state level? We fear. What do we fear? What was their greatest fear? It was just exactly what this man was trying to impose upon the states. He wanted to expand federal power and take over the control of the states. Now do me a favor and shut your cell phones off or throw them away. But don't have them turned on while I'm speaking or I'll be really disappointed. I see about 5 cell phones out here, you know. Okay, we're going on then. The lesson then starts with a new slide. This is the last week's correction so that no one last week will think that I misconstrued construe. Construe, to analyze a clause so as to show its grammatical construction and meaning, to translate, to explain or deduce the meaning of or interpret. So to construe of itself is not bad. It's if we misconstrue something or we construe it to mean false, something false, which is what these three men were doing at their think tank that was called by Bernard Sage in his work, the Massachusetts School. Now today there are think tanks, some are good and some are misconstruing the notions and have false educational ideas. This think tank had some bad concepts. They were consolidationist. Now I learned these words by reading books. I read an old book and the book was this one right here, Abel Parker Upshur's book. He was the one that said, those men are consolidationists. Now his book was about those portions of Joseph Story's commentaries on the Constitution that Abel Upshur felt Joseph Story misconstrued. His book is about Joseph Story's commentaries on the law, but they're only a small part of that commentary that Abel Parker Upshur totally disagrees with. And he calls Joseph Story a consolidationist. Now, that's a little bit of the end of last week's lesson, so that hopefully you don't think I misconstrued too bad. Okay, now for some new material. This evening, we're going to talk about the second founding. Now, a founding is an event in our country where it's where something so dramatic happened that the country takes a dramatic change, a different direction. That's a founding. We had a dramatic event or two take place back in the days of the Revolution, and we had a new country established. That was a founding. We dealt with that last week. The second founding, we're going to start in 1861 and claim it goes to 1878. Now, I came up with those dates. This is not some great political science think tank back in Washington, D.C. thinking this up. Steve Pratt came up with those dates by reading a stack of books. I don't know if my arms are long enough. But after reading enough material, I thought, we have three distinct foundings that have taken place. Events so dramatic that the country was never the same again. Now, the second founding. Noah Webster we mentioned last week. And in the Noah Webster Dictionary, it starts out in one of the earliest pages, it's got this beautiful symbol. Where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is liberty. Liberty. The freedom to choose to do what is right. Now, I didn't find that in a dictionary. I had a class member in one of these classes raise his hand and says, I think there's a better definition of liberty. How about the freedom to choose to do what is right? And I've enjoyed that definition, because if you choose to do what is wrong, what will happen? You will eventually lose your liberty. So liberty is the freedom to choose to do what is right. And where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is liberty. A corollary, a proposition that follows from another that has been proved. I believe the previous statement is a true statement. Could this be a corollary? To the degree an individual or organization suppresses liberty, the Spirit of the Lord departs. Could that be true? If an individual or a government suppresses liberty, to that degree that it suppresses it, does the Spirit of the Lord depart? I believe that it does. Let us consider the second founding as beginning with the gigantic faction of 1861. Now, we laid the foundation for that in last week's lesson. And by the way, on the table back here, we have all of the DVDs from last week's lesson. So if you want to see what we did last week, you can watch it on DVD. United States Senate. Notice the date. December the 25th, 1860. Is there anything unusual about the Senate meeting on that day? They must have been in trying times. This is Senator Stephen A. Douglas. This is the one that conducted the Lincoln-Douglas debates. He stood in the Senate on Christmas Day, and he declared, "The fact can no longer be disguised that many Republican senators desire war and disunion under pretense of saving the Union. For partisan reasons, they are anxious to destroy the Union. They want this done without holding them responsible before the people." Now, could this man be telling the truth? Maybe he's lying. Maybe he's the one that's wrong. Maybe they're all wrong. Maybe the truth hadn't come out at that time. I submit for your consideration that he was telling the truth. The evidence bears that out. The false educational ideas of the Massachusetts school had been embraced by a victorious Republican Party, which was engaged in overthrowing constitutional liberty. With a minority vote, the party had elected a sectional president who represented his client, the gigantic faction of the North, or the gigantic faction, which was the North. This book has been very helpful to understanding this time period. It's ideal to study primary sources. It's not easy to get the original handwritten letters of Abraham Lincoln or some other person of that time period, but we can go to trustworthy scholars. Richard Current is a trustworthy scholar that studies this time period. I've read several of his works, and he does a fine scholarly job. Richard Current selected speeches, letters, and other things from Abraham Lincoln's life, and without any editorial commentary. with no editorial commentary. I like it that way. Then they don't tell you what to think about an event. He simply presents the entire Gettysburg Address or the entire message to Congress on July the 4th, 1861, or his entire speech before Congress in 1848, or his speech before the Young Men's Lyceum in 1830s. And then you can read and start to get a feel for what this man was saying. Now, sometimes what people say isn't what they do. Do any of you fall guilty of that? Ever say, oh, I'll do that? Yes, I tell my wife, I'll get that done, and then next month it isn't done yet. So sometimes we say things that don't happen. Now, we're going to look at some of the political thought of Abraham Lincoln to try and understand this time period. He was a representative, a member of the House of Representatives for one term. In that term, he chastised President James Polk. Now, in my opinion, justifiably so. He was downright harsh with the language that he used to speak out against the President of the United States. It had to do with President Polk's decision to send troops down near Mexico and entice the Mexican troops to start shooting at them so he could go in and trounce them. This is what Lincoln was accusing him of. In 1846, President James K. Polk called for a declaration of war against Mexico. Lincoln opposed the war and held Polk responsible for starting it. Lincoln made a strong speech on the subject before Congress denouncing Polk's aggression against Mexico. Other Whigs held a similar opinion, including Daniel Webster. President Polk's choices, the beginning of a domestic empire. Now, that's my last little phrase down there. Because of the choices he made, it's my impression in studying our history that that was the beginning of domestic empire. Is empire what we want to be? We want the great American empire? We'll tell you what to do. We'll rule the world. No, that's not what we want. We want the republic of republics with liberty and justice for all, where freedom is the watch cry. That's what we want in America. Well, they started suppressing that and overturning it a long time ago. There's good evidence they were speaking out against America in the churches and the scholarly journals in 1796. Hardly had the ink dried on the Constitution. And you'll find a book on the table by George Edmunds. George Edmunds really was Elizabeth Merriweather. But Elizabeth Merriweather knew that if she put it out under her name, people wouldn't respect her work, her scholarship. That book's on the table. The political thought of Abraham Lincoln, a youthful picture goes along with his youthful speech. In January of 1848, he gave this talk, a scathing rebuke of James Polk. In that talk, I'm just going to pluck out one concept, and we're going to review and examine the thinking of Abraham Lincoln. He said, any people anywhere, being inclined and having the power, have the right to rise up and shake off the existing government and form a new one that suits them better. This is a most valuable, a most sacred right. And that was part of his message to James Polk. The references are on the bottom in small type. Now, the political thought of Abraham Lincoln. Notice he's a little older now. This is the year 1852. Let's back up with Mr. Kossuth was a socialist rebel who had been fighting a revolt in Hungary. And as I recall, he failed, and like many of the socialist rebels that were fighting revolts all over Europe during the 1848, that was the big year of the socialist revolutions in Europe, those that failed had to flee, often for their lives. And so these rebels would flee to Switzerland, and then they would flee to England, but inevitably a boatload or two came to the United States. And when they got here, guess what they did? They immediately affiliated with Abraham Lincoln because they liked what he was doing. These are the socialist rebels of Europe. And there's a whole book just been written on that. Very fascinating reading. Now, one of those rebels was this gentleman right here, Louis Kossuth, who had led the revolt in Hungary. Lincoln was the keynote speaker at the Louis Kossuth fundraiser. Louis Kossuth went around the country collecting money to go back and fight another socialist revolution. And the historian says, but before he made it back to Europe, he had spent all the money he collected. Abraham Lincoln gave an address. The whole address is found in that book that I'm quoting from by Richard Current. Here's a quote from it. "It is the right of any people sufficiently numerous for national independence to throw off, to revolutionize their existing form of government, and to establish such other in its stead as they may choose." Now, is there any question about what he said? Do we have to have an analysis of it? It's pretty straightforward. Just said the same thing he said in Congress in 1848. So I've given you two examples now of the political thought of Abraham Lincoln that both confirm, each confirms the other. One in 1848, one in 1852. Now let's go to a little closer to when he's a little older. How about 1861? In 1861, he gave the inaugural address. The gigantic faction which became known as the Republican Party had elected him to president, and he was thrown into this terrible can of worms. And so he steps out, and what's he going to say? How do you address these trying times? So trying that the Senate's meeting on Christmas Day in 1860 to try and figure out what to do. So he comes out on the speaker's stand, and among other things, in his first inaugural address and his message to Congress on July the 4th, and they support each other just as the previous two quotes supported each other. These two speeches support each other in numerous detail. Now we'll give you one example from those from the speech, the inaugural address. Actually, we'll give you several. The political thought of Abraham Lincoln in 1861. "No state, upon its own mere motion, can lawfully get out of the Union." Now, is that what he said in 1848 and 1852? No, here we have a direct contradiction. Let's take another look at some here. Oh, I like this book. William Rawle. William Rawle was a contemporary with the Founding Fathers. He was there. George Washington liked William Rawle a whole bunch. Is that good to know? It's, the kind of people you associate with. If George Washington's, have you ever had anybody say, "Any friend of yours is a friend of mine"? Okay, a friend of George Washington's would be one I would respect. If George Washington respected William Rawle, I would respect him. He invited William Rawle to several different key positions. William Rawle accepted some of them. He was a fine attorney. But when he was invited to be the Attorney General, he declined. He said he would prefer to stay home and run his own business instead of being Attorney General. But he's a highly respected attorney. He wrote the second to earliest law book, A View of the Constitution. It was published in 1825. It was used at West Point as the law book there. If you go to chapter 32, and you read the 15 pages in that chapter, you will find a wonderful explanation of what is the Union, how many states are required in the Union, and can a state secede? This was the law class at several leading schools in America. And the answer is, how many states are required to have the Union? He said at least 2. You have to have 2 that agree to be unified and work together. Can you withdraw? Certainly. It's voluntary. It's a voluntary thing. The Union is where freedom and liberty exist. No one's forced to be in the Union. And he had other wisdom and knowledge that you'll not see unless you read his chapter 32. There's another one. This is an excellent source. I have 4 of them on the table. The Republic of Republics by Bernard Janin Sage, another highly respected attorney. He was the counsel to Jefferson Davis following the war. He was the attorney that hoped it would come to trial. But the North would not take it to trial because they realized if they took Jefferson Davis to trial, the North would lose. And so they refused to try him, even though Jefferson Davis demanded a trial. That's fascinating history. This man was the lawyer that was one of the lawyers preparing to defend Jefferson Davis in the biggest trial of the century that never happened. And the next book, by the way, these are all books that refute what Abraham Lincoln said over the podium at the inaugural address. They totally refute it. Here's another great scholar, Albert Taylor Bledsoe, and I have a stack of these on the table. Albert Taylor Bledsoe, Is Davis a Traitor? Secession as a Constitutional Right Prior to the War of 1861. Now, it wasn't a constitutional right after the War of 1861. but it was before. Now, we're just giving you something to think with. Political thought of Abraham Lincoln. Here again, we're quoting from his first inaugural address. The central idea of secession is the essence of anarchy. Now, just analyze that. Is that true or is that false? Is secession the essence of anarchy? What did the 13 colonies do when they declared their independence? What did they do with England? They seceded. They seceded from England. Did they then go into a state of chaos and confusion? Was it anarchy? No, nonsense. They all wrote their own plan of government, and they all conducted business as usual. There was not the essence of anarchy. Let's read from the Declaration. Was the Declaration of Independence the essence of anarchy? I usually have somebody in the class that blurts out, yes. I thank you for not saying that tonight, so I don't have to have tact in trying to get you to change your mind. Measure Lincoln's political thought using the Declaration as a standard. Now, we're quoting from the Declaration of Independence. This is a primary source. It's one we can depend on. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. That whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it and to institute new government. Now, what did we learn there? To be a member of the Union requires consent, the consent of the state that wants to be in the Union. You have to consent to be in the organized group. And if the government becomes destructive of your rights, then what is your right under this declaration? Then you have the right to change, to withdraw from that government. The political thought of Abraham Lincoln. This is another thought now, again from the first inaugural address. Now, we're going to talk about the first founding. It happened between 1861 and 1878. Something dramatic happened. And this is the key player. He's the man that's leading and in charge of the army that caused it to happen. Constitutional questions are to be decided by the Supreme Court. Well, there was a certain Chief Justice, his name was Roger Taney. When he found out that Lincoln had suspended habeas corpus unconstitutionally, he wrote a brief and sent it to Abraham Lincoln. Now, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court sent the President of the United States a letter saying that, Mr. President, what you did is incorrect and inappropriate, and you can't do that. Constitutional questions are to be decided by the Supreme Court, he says. But when he got the letter, he issued a written warrant for Roger Taney's arrest to have him thrown in prison. This is documented. There are enough sources we've got that one down. It's a credible source. That's thought-provoking. So he didn't really mean what he said. Again from the first inaugural address. All vital rights are guaranteed in the Constitution, and controversies never arise concerning them. How do you feel about that statement? True or false? No, it's nonsense. It's utter nonsense. I'll give you one example. Article 1, Section 8, Clause 1. All duties, imposts, and excises shall be uniform throughout the United States. Were the protectionist tariffs uniform throughout the United States? No. Why did South Carolina say they wanted to secede from the Union? It's because the protectionist tariffs were an overly burdensome tax in that state, and they weren't being equally taxed with the states up north. This was the reason they said we're either going to nullify or we're going to secede. Oh, so there's one example of a vital right that had a major controversy over it. Think, if you can, of a single instance in which a plainly written provision of the Constitution has ever been denied. This is 1861. The President of the United States is speaking in his first inaugural address. Think of an instance. And I thought, well, I just named one. I just named it. Article 1, Section 8, Clause 1, protectionist tariffs denied uniform taxation throughout the United States. This was the whole crux of the argument. No administration, by any extreme of wickedness or folly, can very seriously injure the government in the short space of 4 years. During the next 4 years, under the leadership of the Lincoln administration, I don't give him credit for all the terrible things that happened, but he was the commander-in-chief. Hundreds of thousands of lives were destroyed, the South was devastated, and the Union of Voluntary States was crushed. Huh? You've never heard that before. Probably most of you have never heard that before. The Union was destroyed. No. Mr. Pratt, you're wrong. I learned in high school that the Union was saved by the Civil War. And the slaves were freed. Isn't that what you learned in high school? I submit for your consideration that just the opposite happened. And I'll give you the evidence. The political thought of Abraham Lincoln from his first inaugural address. My countrymen, one and all, think calmly and well upon this whole subject. Nothing valuable can be lost by taking time. Without taking time, Lincoln did the following. Without calling Congress into session, Lincoln made war plans to invade the South. Who has the authority to declare war? Congress, not the President. This is an actual poster from that time period. It's a false propaganda poster. There are about 5 points on the poster that are just outright false. Let me give you a small sample here. What were the people in the North told was the reason they needed to go to war against the South? What were the people told? Well, that poster gives several reasons. Here are some of them. An attack upon Washington, D.C. was anticipated. Was Jefferson Davis and the South planning to go invade Washington, D.C.? The very existence of the government is threatened. Was the government of the North going to be threatened by having a small minority of states withdraw? The answers are no. To vindicate the honor of the flag so ruthlessly torn by traitors' hands from the walls of Sumter. I read a whole book on that. One book written on that story right there. What happened at Sumter? By Richard Current, the credible historian. This is propaganda. This is false propaganda. Now, we talked about that in an earlier lesson. False propaganda, whitewashing, historical blackout. These are ways that history is presented to misconstrue history so that we get a false picture of what happened in the past. We're talking now about the things he didn't take time to do. He said everybody can take time. There's time. And now without taking time, he spent millions of dollars without an appropriation from Congress. Does the President have that authority? No. He suspended the right of habeas corpus. No, he doesn't have that authority. He authorized the recruiting for the Army. No, he doesn't have that authority either. He decreed a blockade of southern ports, clearly an act of war. He defied the orders of the Supreme Court. He signed a warrant to arrest the Chief Justice for rebuking him. After 4 months of running a military dictatorship, he declared to Congress on July the 4th, 1861, that it was not believed any law was violated. Now, this is history most of us have never stopped to take a look upon. We just don't know about it. The political thought of Abraham Lincoln in 1861. Not one of them, the states, ever had a state constitution independent of the Union. This is still from the first inaugural address. You don't have to be a very super high-level student of history to know that these statements are nonsense. They're just plain false. Consider the 13 original states with special attention to the actions of North Carolina and Rhode Island. When we declared our independence from Great Britain, each state declared independence and was a free, sovereign, independent state. Rhode Island was not relying on any other state to tell her what to do. She was sovereign. She made her own decisions what to do, even though she was little. She didn't have to ask Virginia's permission, or New York, or any other state. Each state had its own constitution. long before they ever joined in any form of union. But Rhode Island was the one that held out the longest. How long did Rhode Island hold out and refuse to join? 2 years. For 2 years she was a free, sovereign, independent nation. And the other states had started working together and they developed a union and a constitution, but not Rhode Island. So for a president to declare no one of them ever had a state constitution independent of the union is utter nonsense. Plus Texas. Now this is from his July 4th letter of 1861, a letter read to Congress, which parallels almost exactly all of the concepts in his first inaugural address. So the same things are repeated. He sincerely hopes that your views and your action may so accord with his as to assure all faithful citizens, I highlighted faithful, you'll see why, to assure all faithful citizens who have been disturbed in their rights of a certain and speedy restoration to them under the Constitution and the laws. Now, what made up a faithful citizen? Are you faithful citizens by coming to a lecture that tells things like this? Northern press censorship and arbitrary imprisonment of thousands awaited those northern citizens who were not faithful. Oh, you mean there were things up north you could do to fall into disfavor and then you have to go to jail? That's what happened. The gigantic faction, which was the Republican Party at that time, considered anyone who opposed the war a traitor, and anyone who approved of the war a faithful patriot. So all you had to do was write an editorial or write a letter to the editor and have it published in the newspaper, and a few days later in the middle of the night, someone would kick your door down and violently drag you out and take you to prison. And what would the charges be? There weren't any. Habeas corpus was suspended and military rule was in force. Now, I wondered how many people went to jail. Different history books give different numbers. I don't know which ones are right. But I do know that the extremes fall between 30,000 and 38,000 people that were arrested violently, or they were violently arrested if they resisted arrest, as some of them did, justifiably so. Between 30 and 38,000 went to jail without breaking any law. They were just not faithful. New York City Mayor Fernando Wood denounced Lincoln as an unscrupulous chief magistrate whose recent message to Congress was an ocean of falsehood and deceit. Wow, we don't hear that kind of thing in high school, do we? Let's go on. We're examining this event. This is a dramatic event. I'm not assaulting Lincoln. I don't know if he was a good man or a bad man. All I'm saying is he made some bad decisions. And we'll emphasize that here in a couple of moments so that you'll never forget. His first inaugural address, as I carefully studied them, his message to Congress in July of 1861, I submit for your consideration, were 22 pages of specious reasoning. Now, does it make him bad because he had specious reasoning? Have you ever used specious reasoning, you husbands, with your wives, or you wives with your husbands? Specious means seeming to be good, sound, and correct, logical, without really being so. Oh, honey, wouldn't you just add a new room on the house? We really need one. After all, our pool table doesn't fit in the old basement anymore. You know, specious reasoning can be like that. Innocent, and yet devastating in the case of this event or this period. And so, using specious reasoning, apparently originating from the Massachusetts school. Now we say that because Lincoln's thoughts in his later years were very parallel, almost verbatim, from the doctrines of the Massachusetts school 30 and 40 years earlier. So using specious reasoning, Lincoln declared, maintain the Union at any cost. Now what's the Union? If we go back to William Rawle, we find it's a voluntary association of states. And now if we we go to the Declaration of Independence, we find you can't be a member of the Union without your consent. What if you withdraw your consent? Well, then we'll kill you. We'll start burning your property. We'll overrun your fields. We'll take... That's what happened with this statement. Maintain the Union at any cost meant they would use force to coerce the states into complying and being a member of the voluntary Union. Makes no sense at all to me. As I studied this, my eyes got wider and wider and wider till I couldn't get them any wider, you know? Wow! That's unbelievable. I've never heard it in my life, ever, from anyone. I had to read it. I had to read it in numerous books, and about 10 of them are on the table here. One of them is this book right here. If you don't have a lot of time and you still would like to know this period of history, Charles Adams, he's alive and well today, he writes, "When in the course of human events, arguing the case for Southern secession." He's a fine scholar, he does a good job. The Gettysburg Address, for example, is a collection of mythical blather. Well, that won't get me a win a popularity contest with that statement, will I? Do you think I'm here to tickle your ears? Is that tickling your ears? The Gettysburg Address is mythical blather? Now, I'll define blather. Blather's a new word I just started using. It means nonsense. It's mythical nonsense. Huh? That can't be so. That's what your first impulse is, isn't it? That can't be so. Read chapter 13 and examine Lincoln's logic, and you'll get a good idea of what I'm referring to here. Take, for example, the first sentence. There are 4 factual errors in the first sentence. Huh? Now, we all memorized that thinking that was the greatest political speech ever given in the history of the United States. Haven't you been told that before? 4 factual errors in the first sentence. Let me give you a hint. How does it start? 87 years ago. What date would that be? From the Gettysburg Address back 87 years would give us about what year? 1776. And what happened in 1776? 13 colonies declared their independence and they became free, sovereign, independent states, each one being a nation unto itself. That's what happened. 87 years ago, well, let's see, I think we bring it up on the screen here. Oh, I like this book. You know, you find some of these authors that just do a good job. A good job. This author thinks what happened 87 years ago and all this was wonderful. He thinks that the whole gigantic faction was wonderful and that the results of the Civil War were just fantastic because we got rid of the old republic and democracy was brought into America. But, the author says, by the way, the author is George Fletcher, a professor of law at Columbia Law School. And it's a brand new book, printed in 2001. He says, these things are tremendous that Lincoln brought into effect. It's how Lincoln redefined American democracy, but we can't come right out and say it to the public because that would be saying that his administration overthrew the Constitution. And so we better keep it a secret. Hence the title of his book, Our Secret Constitution, How Lincoln Redefined American Democracy. And what do you suppose he believes is the preamble to the secret Constitution? The Gettysburg Address. That's where the new nation started. That's where the old republic was cast aside. Now, I come to you as a reporter. All I am doing is reporting what I believe is credible research. This is an interesting book. 87 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation. Did they bring forth a new nation? No, absolutely not. How many nations did they bring forth? 13 new nations. Is that significant? It certainly is. And it goes on, conceived in liberty. Were they conceived in liberty? How about the slaves? You know, a few million people there. How about the slaves? Did the Declaration of Independence offer the slaves any hope for any liberty? No, not a shred. Not a shred for them or their posterity after them. Well, how about the women? Did the Declaration offer the downtrodden women, which was all women in America, did it offer them any hope for improvement and liberty? No, it didn't. No, it was for quite a different reason. The Declaration was to declare a separation from the mother country. And then we would do our own thing. We would keep our slaves and keep downtrodden women and other violations of liberty. Now, this is an interesting period. That's 2 of the heirs, by the way. Do you want the other 2, or shall I send you home with a homework assignment to find them for yourself?
Tell us.
We'll send you home with a homework assignment. Lincoln's curious notion of all men are created equal. He says that so many times, and we say it right here. And dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. This has got to be the most overworked, misused, taken out of context phrase in the entire Declaration. We've heard it so many times that we all think it means what it says. Thank you. Thank you for closing that correct statement. We all think it means men. All men are equal. They didn't mention women, of course. Is that what it means? No. On the table, there should be a handout. America according to Lincoln. And there's a little 1-page handout. The author gives you a good viewpoint, a different perspective than what you've heard. I think he's closer to the truth than what the school textbooks are that I read from. All men are created equal is an interesting statement. Let's see how equal they were in the eyes of Abraham Lincoln. He declared that whites are superior to blacks. Now, he said all men are created equal, but white men are more equal than black men. For a payment of $300, can you see the sign in the background? The drafting office, to the drafting office. And here we have a Union soldier, and he's poking a bayonet into this reluctant man, telling him, go get drafted. Okay, that's the poster from that time period. Now, for a payment of $300, if that man had $300, he could go flop it on the counter, then he didn't have to go into the draft. Wouldn't that be nice? All men are created equal, except those that have $300 are more equal than the others. Lincoln's protective tariffs strongly favored the North. Government spending on internal improvements strongly favored the North. These were the key points of the Republican Party platform. Internal improvements, protective tariffs, and a new central bank. He worked to destroy opposition newspapers. He owned a newspaper of his own in secret. A German newspaper to try and get the support of the German population. That's an interesting part of the story in this book. This book was printed about 3 years ago. It's a brand new research report. Well done. All about newspapers and oppression of newspapers. He suspended habeas corpus and imprisoned thousands of northern men for merely disagreeing with his policies. Come, let us reason together. If the Declaration of Independence literally meant that all men are created equal, if it is an underlying theme of our system of government, as Lincoln implies by his frequent references, then why is equality never mentioned in the preamble to the Constitution? It is never mentioned in the Constitution, it is never mentioned in the Bill of Rights, and it is never mentioned in any document leading up to the founding of the nation. We can go back to the Mayflower Compact right on up through all the famous documents. You never read anything about equality. That's because all men are created equal has been taken out of context. It's one of 11 propositions that Thomas Jefferson has put into the Declaration. There are 10 more. And to take it out and single it out and blow it up and make it mean something other than what it really means is not honest scholarship. In fact, the Constitution allows for the unequal treatment of men. Wish we had more time. We give you a whole bunch of examples. For example, just give you 2 or 3. Many valid laws give benefits or protections to designated groups, such as widows, children, and people based on need. Many laws impose obligations unequally on designated groups, such as military, draft registration, and service. Many laws discriminate among different groups. Now you can read the rest of this in Phyllis Schlafly's book laying on the table. It's called The Supremacist. And those are quotes out of her book, and she gives more illustration than that. So the Constitution was never designed to treat all people equal, as we misinterpret that phrase from the Declaration. Our 16th president was guilty of perjury, arrogation of powers, and treason. He perjured his oath by violating the Constitution and stole power to carry out the agenda of his client, the gigantic faction of the North. He ordered an army which he called forth without authority to begin levying war against them, the southern states, all the while adhering to their enemies, the gigantic faction, giving them aid and comfort. This will be closer to the truth than probably anything you've seen or heard about this period of history. These are some of the books that I found valuable. I read carefully, and the stack is much taller now, as I tried for the first time in my life to grasp what happened during this period we call the Civil War, which was really America's uncivil war. What happened? And how did that affect government today? See, some people say, oh, why are you kicking a dead horse? Why do we even care what happened back then? We've got problems to solve right now. We've got to figure out what to do with the underprivileged and the poor. Why do we study history at all? Why do we care what happened in the days of George Washington? Why do you care? Thank you. So we won't repeat it. Let's not repeat the same mistakes. Let's go back and examine our history. This book right here, The Real Lincoln, I brought 3 tonight and they're already gone. The Real Lincoln was the first one. It was boy, I read that. I couldn't believe what I read. I told some of my friends about it, and one of my friends became indignant and said, you shouldn't be saying things like that about President Lincoln, a great hero. I says, I'm not questioning his heroic ability. I'm just asking, is this true? How much of it's true? Oh, he said, my friend said, that's half-truths you're reading and lies. Did I give you lies when I quoted the Gettysburg Address? Was that first sentence a lie? Did I give you lies when I quoted from his first inaugural address? No, those aren't lies. I'm just giving you primary sources that you can use your own brain and think about it and think, is that true? And how did that impact the nation? What were the results of those choices? What were the results of the false educational ideas to which he embraced? Now, this is a section that Bernard Sage, I'm very grateful that he put it in his book, Justice to Mr. Lincoln. I don't know if he's a great man or not. I don't know his goodness. That's God's choice to decide that. I don't know what's in his heart, but I can observe the choices he made and the devastating consequences of those choices. Justice to Mr. Lincoln. Bernard Janin Sage, The Republic of Republics, written in 1878. He was a contemporary. He was there. He lived through this period. He writes on page 234, it seems proper to say that after his nomination, he had no time, even if he had been competent, to investigate for himself and deduce correct conclusions. Moreover, the dogmas and arguments of Dane, Story, Webster, and Jackson were the platform, nay, the very soul of his party. Confiding in the honor of these expounders, he unqualifiedly accepted their treasonable perversions, and they, more than he, are responsible for the bloody consequences. From their premises and arguments, he concluded that coercion of states was constitutional and proper. Now see, Bernard Sage is dumping it back on the laps of the scholars that influenced and taught Lincoln. Acting upon their doctrines, he made the land dark with death and mourning. And this, I just added a little bit more here. The expoundings of Dane, Story, and Webster, and the results thereof, will live as long as history itself. Mighty armies rallied upon their phrases and marched to the music of their sounding words. At their bidding, hundreds of thousands were slain, wide regions desolated, and states reduced from freedom to the most abject bondage of provinces. What was the condition of the states in 1878? This was the time when Robert E. Lee said, had I known this would happen, I would have maintained the battle and fought with my sword bravely until I was killed. It's a poor paraphrase of what he said, but Robert E. Lee recognized the terrible, terrible treatment that the states received. This is an accurate statement in 1878. They were no better than provinces. And how far have we risen above that level since then? Now, I added this just last night. I think we need to take the time to see this is one man's opinion. We're reading the opinion of Bernard Sage, a capable, qualified, good man back in that time period. And he makes this observation. Abraham Lincoln was a person of fair intellect, slight education, limited knowledge, no research, kind heart, jocular disposition, and credulous and confiding nature. Just the man with his inexperience in statesmanship and his vague and hazy notions of political ethics and constitutional history and law, to be misled by the sophist of his party, and to be the instrument of crafty political Jesuits. He was not a man to contrive wickedness, to willfully subvert the Constitution, and to build his greatness on this country's ruin. But he could be moved by various plausible and delusive pleas and pretext to do what he would have shrunk from with horror had he understood the designs or seen the hearts of the movers. Now, I've read a stack of books this high. And that's the most accurate statement that I concluded myself from this pile of reading. This is probably as closer to the truth than anything I've seen. Oh, this part I like. This is the relief now. But I'm going to have my dad help me, but I've never had the privilege of having him here before. We celebrated his 95th birthday, March the 14th, 2007. Not long before that, about a few months before that, he had been making Christmas presents in his shop. And he made a bad choice. Now, have I prepared you for what's about to happen? He made a bad choice. Now, does that make him a bad man? So people sometimes think I'm coming down too hard on Lincoln by pointing out the bad choices he made. You cannot understand American government if you don't understand what happened as a consequence of those choices. So I'm going to take it a little closer to home now, right to my own family. My dad is a great hero, and he's not a bad man, but he made a bad choice. Can I say that safely here without getting into trouble? He raised his hand. I got his permission to do this. Now, we're going to show a slide now. Choices have consequences. If you make a bad choice, no matter how good a person you are, you may suffer. You will suffer the consequences. My father offered his helping hand. Now, we're going to try and understand what happened during this period of time by this visual aid. He was making Christmas presents, and he made a bad choice. Let this hand, by the way, this is after the doctors cleaned it up and were preparing to repair it, reconstruct it. Let this hand represent the wreckage of the Civil War. Because of bad choices, we had a wreckage in our country, a derailment. Hundreds of thousands of people were crushed and maimed and destroyed for life. They estimate 620,000 died. Hundreds of thousands of more were injured and crushed and mangled. This hand is nothing in comparison to what happened then. And yet, in some small way, maybe by looking at that slide, you can get a grasp. This represents symbolically the wreckage of the Civil War. The side that won the war wrote the history, and they made it look like this. Ah, what a relief. Aren't you glad you didn't have to look at it again? Remember in one of our earlier lessons, whitewashing, historical blackout, false propaganda. These are ways some history is dealt with, and when you get it, you will not know the truth. That's not the truth. That is not the truth. We were told in my history books that I went to school and learned from that this noble war fought by this hero commander-in-chief freed the slaves. And it saved the Union. And after the Reconstruction period, the Constitution was restored. Now, let's see a show of hands. How many have had that presented to you in that way? Come on, show me. Yeah, we all have. That's what they said. This is the official literature. It's from the gatekeepers of history. Somebody in this classroom told me they felt like they were cheated when they went through college and got a major in history because they were never told this story. Let this hand, not quite yet, what is history? We did this in an earlier lesson. An account of what has happened. That's a definition out of the dictionary. History is an account of what has happened. Does it mean it's true? Not necessarily. It's just an account. How about the story accepted by the public? That's again out of the dictionary. Is that what history is? History is the story accepted by the public. That's history, according to many textbooks. History is debate informed by evidence and reason. That's the one I like. I believe that's the best definition. We need evidence, we need common sense, and we need some discussion about it. What does this evidence mean? Or the third one down there, just one history professor named Ralph Ryko asked his class, and that was what the class, one of the members said. It's just one damn thing after another. So different viewpoints of what is history. The one that we just viewed is the story accepted by the public. It's whitewashed history. Now that's the front cover of a book from an earlier lesson. This book is called The Lies My Teacher Told Me. That's a history book written by a history professor, which is a book report of 12 high school history books. And he weighs them because they're so big. 5.3 pounds, 1,200 pages. Then he gives a book report on 12 of them. And then he writes the book called Lies My Teacher Told Me, and his front cover is whitewash on top of a history book. Let's try and discover what is the bare naked truth. That's all I'm interested in. I have no motive other than to know what happened, what really happened, and how did that affect me today. Let this hand represent reconstruction. Reconstruction after the war. That's bad enough, isn't it? Robert E. Lee said, had he known what it was going to be like, he'd have kept fighting till he died. I remember that day, Dad, when I went to visit you and took that picture. You were sitting in a chair in a rehabilitation place where they were helping him to get his, strength back. And I said, Dad, tell me about your accident. And his first statement was, that was no accident. Bad choice. When I told my little 6-year-old grandson what happened to Grandpa, I said, grandson, his name is Levi, Grandpa made a bad choice, and he put his hand there, and Levi says, he's never run a table saw, he's just 6 years old, but he watches me run it, and he says, why didn't Grandpa use push sticks? Oh, yeah. Now, we're going to learn from this. You'll go home, you'll not forget this lesson. It'll stay in your mind. A truism. A state is not sovereign when it can no longer freely choose the form of government by which it will be ruled. Have you ever heard the sovereign state of Utah? That's nonsense. You're not sovereign if you can't choose what government under which you will be ruled. Let this hand represent our country today. Instead of a republic of republics, it's now fitting since Gettysburg to call it a new nation, or the nation. We still have a constitution, but if you look close at the Constitution, it no longer functions correctly. It's shorter and it's stiff, and it just doesn't work right. Whatever happened to the free, sovereign, independent states? We still have the legislature, the executive, and the judicial. We have the appearance of constitutional government, but who can honestly tell me that we follow the Constitution today? We don't. Not the slightest semblance of it. Only the charade. I remember hearing, just Bill Clinton on television once, after was over with his term of presidency, and they were interviewing Bill Clinton, former president, And he says at one point, he says, well, before I answer that, I would have to refer to the Constitution. I thought of all of the... I'll withhold the statements I was just thinking. There are laws established by God in heaven, laws that govern everything. There are laws that govern the running of a table saw, and there are laws that govern the running of a country. And if we violate those laws, we suffer the consequences. Maintain the Union at any cost would have been much more accurately stated had he declared, maintain the empire at any cost. We had started toward domestic empire under the leadership of James Polk, who Abraham Lincoln denounced. But just a few years later, he got involved in the same kind of a movement. And his effort further secured the domestic empire. And we've never gotten out of that movement. Now we're an international empire. What is an empire? An empire is a group of states or territories under one absolute sovereign power or authority. Does that define America today? A group of states or territories under one absolute power or authority. Let's suppose that the state of Texas decides to pass a law against sodomy, the evil, heinous crime of sodomy. Does Texas have the authority to do that? They thought they did in the year 2003, and they passed the law in the state of Texas. Sodomy is illegal in the state of Texas. Oh, but then the federal government overturned it. The Supreme Court says you can't do that. Sodomy is legal in the state of Texas. And that makes it legal everywhere else. Empire, a group of states or territories under one absolute sovereign power or authority. Now there are three questions we need to answer as we study this period of history. Did the war between the states, America's uncivil war, save the Union? I'm going to let you have a short answer from one or two sources, very short answers. Yankee Leviathan, The Origins of Central State Authority in America, 1859 to 1877, by Richard Benzel, published in Cambridge University Press in 1990. Here's what Richard Benzel has to say about that question. The modern American state emerged from the wreckage of the Civil War. Well, that's an interesting concept, emerged from the wreckage of the Civil War. Or how about this one? The secession of the South and the decision of the North to attempt military reunification produced an explosive expansion of central state authority. Ooh. Hence, a second founding. And that's the title for this evening's lesson. But that's not all. Human events. This is the one that you can take home and read. During the war between the states, a new nation was brought forth with an all-powerful federal government, obliterating the sovereignty of the states. Lincoln's war to preserve the Union turned out to be a war that destroyed it. Page 49. England was following closely what we were doing. This great experiment in freedom and liberty, supposed to be the model for the world to follow. Every nation in the world, we're told, was supposed to be looking at America. The example of how liberty should be carried out. And so when England saw what we were doing, they published in their newspapers the truth. You couldn't do it in America. Had you put this political caricature into a northern newspaper, you would have been thrown in jail, and likely your newspaper would have been destroyed. What is this caricature? Well, if you can't read it, it's the federal phoenix. A nation-state arises out of the destruction of the constitutional compact among the states. Free commerce is replaced with extreme protectionism. Sound money is replaced with credit. The Bill of Rights with press censorship and arbitrary imprisonment. The end of the Union, as it was. Now that's an English newspaper publishing what happened in America. What is the fuel bringing forth this great federal phoenix? What is the fuel? Well, they're burning the Constitution, they're burning the free press, they're burning states' rights, they're burning all the things that America was founded upon, that made America great. That's how the English political caricature saw what was happening in America. The second question, three big questions. Did the Emancipation Proclamation free the slaves? All my life I was told that it freed the slaves. I had no idea that it didn't do that. Wow, what an eye-opener. Let's take a couple of examples here. Here is an engraving showing Lincoln distressed over should he sign the Emancipation Proclamation. This on the floor is the Constitution. That's symbolic. He's treading on the Constitution. We won't try to explain all of the political significance of the room. Just understand that he's stressed over what to do. And then he finally signs it. George McClellan, do you remember that character in history? He was originally the top leader in Lincoln's military, later ran for president against Lincoln. George McClellan said, "No real statesman could ever contemplate so sweeping and serious a measure as sudden and general emancipation without looking to the future and providing for its consequences. You can't just do sudden emancipation." And guess what Lincoln said as a young man? Lincoln said in one of his speeches, "You can't just do sudden emancipation." And then a few years later, he did it. Here's a political caricature. Don't dare print it in the North. This is from England. This, by the way, these are out of a chapter in the book Charles Adams, When in the Course of Human Events. What is this? Who's this guy right here? This happy, smiling face. This is 18 months into the war now. Who's happy? Jefferson Davis. Why? Because they haven't whipped him yet. This huge army of the North is still trying to figure out how to whip the South. And Jefferson Davis is depicted as being quite pleased with the fact they haven't whipped him yet. Over here we have a very disgruntled Abraham Lincoln with horns in his hair like the devil. Again, this is a political caricature from England. And what's he about ready to throw on the table? They're playing a card game he's going to throw down. A black man. That's not the ace of spades. That's a black man up there on that card. He's going to play his last card, and that's what Lincoln called it himself. His last card was emancipation. I'm going to free those slaves. Now, maybe these things will happen. Maybe there'll be an uprising. Maybe. Oh, and he only freed them he only freed the slaves where they weren't under the control of the North. No slaves were freed where they had northern control. Only in those areas where there was no northern control were they declared free. He throws his card down on the table. It was definitely a turning point. Again in England, from a magazine we read about this event. It was the most atrocious act of war policy ever adopted by a civilized state. Emancipation Proclamation, perhaps the worst possible method of freeing the slaves. Consider the example of England. Just a few years before, something wonderful happened in England. How many of you have seen Amazing Grace? You've only seen a part of the story, by the way. You've only seen a part. It's got much more beautiful material in the story. Amazing Grace. William Wilberforce, Thomas Clarkston, John Newton, these great people of that time period who peacefully, without killing anyone or stealing anybody's property, freed the slaves. That's a good place to take a rest. This is a very happy thought, very happy, positive thought. Maybe you'll come back. In 10 minutes, let's come back for the second half. We're done with that period. We're ready to move out now to a new time. Now, we've finished the period of time where we're going to move on in periods now. What happened after this totally unnecessary, terrible fiasco called the Civil War? What happened? What were the results? In this period, like the first founding, we had founding fathers. The first founding, we know the names of those founding fathers. George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, Benjamin Franklin, probably all of you could name a dozen at least of the first founders. But how many of us can name who were responsible for changing America in the second founding? I offer you some names for consideration. Abraham Lincoln, Thaddeus Stevens, Wendell Phillips, Charles Sumner, and so forth. There are many of them that played a role in making the change, in overthrowing the Union and establishing a strong central government with control over the states. No longer did we have free, sovereign, independent states. Let's introduce you to some of these characters. This is a brand new book. 2007 is quite current. Good scholarship. It focuses on the subject of the Republican Party's earliest founding. He calls it Red Republicans because the authors point out Marxism played a role in some of the people that were the leaders. And so they then give you examples and quotes from the variety of persons they feel should be of interest to you. Red Republicans, Marxism in the Civil War, and Lincoln's Marxist. This perhaps was the first communist in a high-ranking position, they point out in their book. The Undersecretary of War, a man named Dana, was a communist. And Later we find out there were hundreds of communists in administrations, but this was one that we had at least one in. Now, they raise these two questions in their book. Why did Karl Marx and other socialists find Mr. Lincoln's war worthy of their support? Why didn't they support the South? What drew the attention of the Marxist to the North? Why was Karl Marx delighted with what the North was doing as they tried to burn to the ground and build on the ashes of the southern states? Where do I get that quote? That's Karl Marx. Karl Marx says the way to do it is burn to the ground and build on the ashes. So what did Sherman and Sheridan and Grant do? They burnt to the ground and built on the ashes. Why did these radical socialists feel a kinship with Abraham Lincoln and share the desire for the destruction of the South? They answer those questions in this book. I enjoyed reading it very much. Just a few days ago I completed it. This man became probably the most powerful person in the United States shortly after the assassination of the president. Thaddeus Stevens, a Republican representative. He said, "The Constitution is a worthless bit of old parchment." Now, he swore an oath to uphold and defend this Constitution. And now we find out his true feelings. He thinks it's just an old parchment. There's another character that we need to hear about, Republican Senator Wendell Phillips. Wendell Phillips declared, "Let there be no compromise until every breathing soul who holds to the old American principles of constitutionalism ceases to breathe." Well, that's pretty clear, isn't it? He wasn't too strongly in favor of the old traditional republic under the Constitution. He said further, "The Republican Party is in no sense a national party. It is a party of the North, organized against the South." Now, this is one of the highest-ranking Republican officials in that time period, declaring the Republican Party was organized against the South. The gigantic faction, the think tank, Nathan Dane, Joseph Story, Daniel Webster, and numerous other prominent men with false educational ideas. Now, this is a new word. Reading is a wonderful way to expand your vocabulary. Apotheosized. Apotheosized. I'd never heard the word until I read it from Elizabeth Merriweather's book back here on the table. George Edmunds, Elizabeth Merriweather's equals George Edmunds. And she says in there, quoting from the St. Louis Globe-Democrat of March the 6th, 1898, and the St. Louis Globe-Democrat, notice the year, it's long after the smoke and embers have died down. It's long after so-called Reconstruction is completed. It's 20 years later after Reconstruction. And she says, quoting from the paper, now the paper is a Republican paper. They're not going to say bad things about Republicans. They simply say, "Abraham Lincoln has long since entered the sublime realm of apotheosis." Well, what does that mean? That means that Abraham Lincoln, no fault of his, has been apotheosized, or he has been made godlike, glorified, or idealized. Doesn't this sometimes happen when we assassinate somebody? Then we think, "Oh, that poor soul, he was such a good man." Yeah, Martin Luther King's another example who was apotheosized after his assassination.
The Pharaohs of Egypt.
Okay, there are numerous examples, but this is a new word that I hadn't been using. Of course, you all knew that word already. I just hadn't learned it yet. Now there's another quotation from the same newspaper, later on a different date. "One thing is certain, Lincoln was apotheosized after his death." Now, that's an interesting and thought-provoking thing. Why did they want to make Lincoln greater than he really was? Following his death, the Republican leaders who had venomously vituperated the living Lincoln made frantic haste to perform apotheosis and hoist their dead president to the sublime realm. We're still reading from Elizabeth Merriweather's, and she gives more illustration and example. Example, this is quoting from page 4 of Elizabeth Merriweather's. "Abraham Lincoln, first president of the Republican Party, the greatest, wisest, godliest man that has appeared on earth since Christ." Now that was some of the apotheosis that was being passed around after his death. Who was passing it around? Those people who had vituperated him. For example, his cabinet didn't get along with Lincoln very well. One of his cabinet members was so distraught and so disgruntled with Lincoln, he called Abraham Lincoln the baboon at the end of the hall. Yeah, one of his cabinet members. Who was doing the apotheosizing? Who was now claiming that he was next to Christ? The same people. These were not statesmen, these were politicians. Politicians vying for power. There's one book back on that table that tells about the political parties just before Lincoln's election. I don't see it laying there anymore. It's that big thick one for $16. Who got it? You lucky guy. I only had one left. No, that isn't it. I have 4 of those. Anyway, the political parties had long since abandoned statesmanship. The day of the great statesman was long gone. All we had was people vying for political power. We had politicians smoking big cigars in back rooms trying to decide how they could oust the other ones. Here's an example of apotheosizing. You'll hear him tomorrow morning. I hope to be there. I was the keynote speaker at this event. I was the keynote speaker at the Lincoln Day dinner of 2006. He was there to give a 5-minute talk. He got up and he flared his arms out and he said, Abraham Lincoln, first president of the Republican Party, is the greatest president that ever lived. And then the next sentence was, and we should be grateful that we're being led by a great conservative leader, George W. Bush. Those were the 2 opening sentences of his 5-minute talk. It was the best of the talks given by the Republican leadership that night. They got worse after that. That's an example of apotheosis. Is there any truth in that statement? No. Why did the southern states want to leave the Union? And why did the northern states refuse to let them go? If you're going to understand our history, you need to answer these 2 questions. Let's go back to Charles Dickens. We're back in England again. Union means so many millions a year lost to the South. Secession means the loss of the same millions to the North. The love of money is the root of this as of many, many other evils. The quarrel between the North and South is, as it stands, solely a fiscal quarrel. It had nothing to do with abolishing slavery or saving the Union. It was solely a fiscal quarrel, fighting over money, politicians, and power. This is the 3rd big question that needs to be answered. Was the Constitution restored following Reconstruction? Horace Greeley, New York Tribune publisher and a devout socialist, he was the one that invited Karl Marx to print articles in his newspaper after they were translated into English. A mighty army, a navy absorbing nearly the whole mercantile marine, vast military stores, a martial law, a national debt, a heavy taxation, enormous dues, all things which it has long been the object of all constitutional statesmen to prevent, have now been established without resistance and have transformed the government. And there's one more testimonial, the second founding. They transformed the government. And so when George Fletcher wrote in his book, Our Secret Constitution, well, we'll quote him again here a little later, that things changed dramatically. Isn't it wonderful, he said, we're now a democracy, a nation. That was the transformation. Bernard Sage speaks of the Philadelphia Convention of 1866. Now, we've all heard of the Philadelphia Convention of 1776, and we've all heard of the Philadelphia Convention of 1787. But who has ever heard of the Philadelphia Convention of 1866? This is the convention just after the dramatic change had taken place. Just after the Union was destroyed and a powerful central government had taken its place, and now a convention gets together and they declare and write, in 2 most important particulars, the victory achieved by the national government. What happened to the Republic of Republics? What happened to the federalized states? No, now we're a national government. The victory achieved by the national government has been final and decisive. That means we'll kill you if you try to get out. It's final and decisive. We just proved that. We just killed 620,000 people and many more were injured. We proved it. It's final and decisive. First, it has established beyond all further controversy and by the highest of all human sanctions the absolute supremacy of the national government as defined, etc., and the permanent integrity and indissolubility of the federal union. A nation indivisible. That make you cringe just a little bit? I was looking at your faces on that one. See if I got any audience response. One nation, indivisible, is what they created during this controversy. Our secret constitution. The Civil War called forth a new constitutional order. The principles of this new legal regime are so radically different from our original Constitution drafted in 1787 that they deserve to be recognized as a second American Constitution. That's George Fletcher writing in 2001 from Columbia Law School. We now have a second Constitution. We've had it since 1861. But we dare not say that to the public, and so we'll keep it a secret. Our secret. Following the war on the South, Lincoln, Grant, and the Union armies gave victory to Hamiltonism when it subjected the Confederates in the South. Now we're quoting here from a 1900 newspaper, the Globe Democrat of St. Louis. Now remember in an earlier lesson we defined Hamiltonism and Jeffersonism? Now it starts making sense, doesn't it? Lincoln and his armies implemented Hamiltonism and threw out Jeffersonism. That happened. This newspaper just is a small evidence confirming that. This is the diagram that Sage puts in his book to illustrate after 1878 the form of government that we had, or after 1865 or whatever period there it changed. Instead of the Constitution, the people, and things being in correct order, he has the government with absolute supremacy. Just like the Philadelphia Convention said in 1866. The government now is absolutely supreme. They are over the Constitution. They will tell you what the Constitution means. And the quondam states. Quondam? Oh dear. Apotheosizing quondam. What are you going to do with it? Learn the words. Quondam. That was at one time, or former. The quondam states are under the Constitution. The states that were states, that was at one time or were at one time states, are under the Constitution, but they're under the absolute supremacy of the federal government. And alas, down at the bottom we still have the people. This is Bernard Sage's excellent diagram that he drew in 1878. Under the new nation, established during the subjugation of the South, the Constitution became a law upon the states and not a compact among them. I hope you grasp what I'm saying. Oh, we'll use a paper hand this time. It's not so frightening. This is the paper hand representing America today. The United States of America in 2008. We still have what they call the Constitution, but with it all distorted like it is, I think we'll just call it the Tushin. We don't have any sovereign states anymore, but we do have a legislature, greatly shriveled, I might add, greatly shriveled. Why do I say shriveled? Why do I say the legislature is shriveled? We had a president of the United States who lied under oath, committing perjury. They impeached him and found him guilty, but they were too shriveled to remove him from office. They could not even the ones you'll hear tomorrow, could vote to remove him from office. They're shriveled. When is the last time we declared a war? When is the last time we declared war? We've been to war for the last 60 years. In World War II, it was actually 1942, and I correct one of the tapes, you'll hear me saying, the last time we declared war was 1941. That's wrong. It's 1942. And we declared war against Romania, Hungary, and Yugoslavia, or some states that I hadn't been aware of. But it was still World War II. So we've gone for 60 years fighting, battling, shooting, killing, and Congress can't even declare war. Do you want more examples to show a shriveled Congress? That should be enough. a bloated executive, and a bloated judicial. This is an accurate diagram showing America today. And when we write United States of America in a sentence, what is the correct English following that phrase? The United States of America is. Prior to 1861, it was the United States of America are. Yeah. Now followed a long train of abuses. A long train of abuses. 1867, hardly had they completed their conquest of the South, they started implementing powerful central government-controlled agencies. The Department of Education, for example. The New York Sun of 1881, and we're quoting here from President James Garfield, the influence of Jefferson's democratic principles is rapidly waning, while the principles of Hamilton are rapidly increasing. Power has been gravitating toward the central government. Now that's a nice plain statement. Only thing, the last sentence is wrong. Gravitating isn't an accurate statement. It was not gravitating. Power wasn't really gravitating toward the central government. It had been yanked from the states and usurped by the central government during the Lincoln administration. It wasn't gravitating. Nevertheless, centralization of power continued to go from bad to worse. Interstate Commerce Commission, 1887, with its horrendous amount of influence in America today, agencies and regulations emanating from that institution. Red Republicans, they point out, this I probably should skip it so you don't boo me and throw rotten eggs at me, that during this period of time, I'm putting these in chronological sequence, by the way. There's a chronology here. This is a statement about the man that wrote the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag. He was a socialist that loved Lincoln, thought Lincoln did a wonderful thing, and we should have a pledge to the new flag under the new nation. Here's what the original was. It was September of 1892. The socialist magazine, The Youth's Companion, published a suggestion for a pledge to honor this great event of the Civil War. I pledge allegiance to my flag and the republic for which it stands, one nation indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And then in 1924, the flag of the United States of America was put in as an additional phrase. Congress approved it in 1942, and in 1954 they added the phrase "under God." That's a bit of history about the Pledge of Allegiance. One nation indivisible is a phrase coming from the Massachusetts school. It's the whole reason that they fought a war to conquer the South, to have an indivisible union. Pre-1861, a voluntary association of free and independent states. I was looking at that like last night, and I thought, if I was to write the pledge, I would certainly put the "under God" part in. In fact, I wouldn't take the pledge if they took "under God" out. I wouldn't pledge to this flag if it didn't have "under God" in there. A nation under God is almost acceptable, but not one nation indivisible. I would rewrite the pledge if I had my way. I would put something in there like a voluntary association of free and independent states. That's what I pledge to. Just like they were when George Washington and those good brethren in the past wrote the Constitution. Now, this started happening. Demonizing the Constitution is the name of a great speech from a dear friend named W. Cleone Skousen. Demonizing the Constitution, and he gives us numerous detail what was going on at the beginning then of this century. He gives the example of J.P. Morgan, John D. Rockefeller, Andrew Carnegie, and other prominent men, and what their goals and motives were to gain power and wealth. Here some of their goals are: establish a private bank to control the nation's money, change from wealth-based money to debt money, establish a Marxist-style income tax, remove selection of senators from the states, manipulate the presidential election, increase dependence on government with welfare programs, use the crisis of war to centralize power. We're doing that right now. That's this whole Iraq thing. Use the crisis of war to centralize power, and unite the nations to create a new world order. These were all goals. These were all goals in the year 1910. Does any of that sound familiar? Now Now, tomorrow night's lesson, we're going to go heavy on that bottom one. Unite the nations to create a new world order. And we'll give you the history of America from 1945 to the present day. His thinking and my thinking are one. Who are we looking at here? Well, this is Woodrow Wilson on the left and his alter ego, Mandel House. Mandel House was the behind-the-scenes man. I've heard Mandel House described as a hardcore devout socialist. And that's a very accurate description. Hardcore socialist. He was pulling the strings that people will never see or hear. He was the kind of person that you didn't hear about it. They didn't say, and Mandel House said, do such and such. The president would make decisions. He would do such and such. But he always consulted with Mandel House. And President Wilson said, his thinking and my thinking are one. Mandel House revealed his thinking. It was written anonymously in the first drafts. The first time it came out, Philip Drew Administrator, there was the name of Mandel House was not associated with it. And what it was a political tract explaining the best form of government. I mean, if we could have the ideal society, what would we do? Wow. Well, he said, if we could have the ideal society, we would have socialism as dreamed of by Karl Marx. That's right out of Philip Drew, Administrator. His thinking and my thinking are one. Wilson loved Mandel House until late in the game, but he followed him almost his whole career. Why is this woman in the middle so unhappy, and who is that? That's Wilson's wife, and she doesn't like Mandel House. It says in the history that they didn't get along. And so I thought this is a good photograph. Here these two men are yak, 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 back and forth, and Ma just sitting there with a grin. While this was all going on, while all these terrible things, war and demonizing the Constitution and programs of corruption and prominent men trying to take power and wealth, while all this was going on, your grandparents and great-grandparents were being born. And I have a little bit of story here that will help us. I hope you'll relate it to your own family. As we talk about families, this is kind of a relief shot. This could be your family. How many of you had farmers back 2 generations ago, farming families? Sure, at least half the audience. Your parents or grandparents or great-grandparents were in agriculture. And so here we have a hay crew, and they're out putting up the hay, and this could be 80 years ago. Well, they had no knowledge of the schemes of the social do-gooders. They didn't know all those things I just presented to you. They'd never heard this story before. They didn't learn this anywhere. They had no knowledge, and you'll get that phrase out of the Bible in just a moment. We'll quote 2 Bible scriptures. They had no knowledge of the schemes of the social do-gooders. This is a hay crew up close. I love it. That's my dad. I think he said he was about 17 years old then. This is my grandfather. They're having fun. They're the hay crew, and they just stopped for a photograph. Now, I'm going to take you back a little further. Well, first the scripture. These people, these good people, all over the United States, your grandparents, your great-grandparents, they have the same problem that they were having in the days of Isaiah. My people are gone into captivity because they have no knowledge. Another Bible scripture says, my people are destroyed because they have no knowledge. Is knowledge important to preserving liberty? A nation of well-informed men who have been taught to know and prize the rights which God has given them cannot be enslaved. It is in the region of ignorance that tyranny begins. These are wisdom from the past. And if a nation expects to be ignorant and free, they expect what never was and what never will be. Oh, that's old-time wisdom. Do we have any obligation to gain some knowledge? I hope you feel we do. You wouldn't be here if you didn't. This is the ranch. Back at the ranch where the hay crew was. I don't know all the geography here, but somewhere over here is the ranch house. And that's Grandma's kitchen. And we're going to hear a story about Grandma's kitchen. This is my father somewhere way back in the old days when he's 5 or 6 years old. This is his grandmother, Eunice Peterson. Now, We have an unusual opportunity tonight. This 96-year-old man is with us, and I want him to stand and tell the story that I usually tell.
The standing is the hard part. 6 years old. I lived with my two younger sisters and my parents on a cattle ranch in central Washington, 10 miles beyond any road. And when you got to the road, it was just a dusty or muddy rut, according to the weather. I loved my grandmother and grandfather, of course, and one of the highlights of my life was to be able to go up to their house over a mile away, and they were our closest neighbors, and spend the night with Grandma and Grandpa. They had very little. We were two bone-jarring days from the nearest town. We ate what we raised, and we raised what we ate. But I remember how I loved to stay there at Grandma's house. I always slept upstairs in an unfinished attic bedroom, or room. It wasn't a bedroom, but that's where I stayed. And when I heard Grandma stirring down in the kitchen, I would get up. I couldn't miss a minute of it. It would be before 5 o'clock. The men were already out in the fields, and Grandma was getting ready for the day's menu. And I would sneak down the stairs because I didn't want to disturb Grandma. And she didn't know I was there. And I would sit on the lowest step, and the old wood range was right there by me. I could almost touch it, with the tea kettle hissing on the singing. Oh, you miss so many good sounds today. Life was so peaceful and life was so wonderful. And this particular morning, Grandma was working at the only furniture she had in that kitchen. No cabinets, just a work table in the center of the room where she was preparing the day's menus. Always pie, lots of pie. And her arms would be bare and she'd be covered with flour up to her elbows. And in this particular morning she was singing, and I can remember the tune, "I'll Take You Home Again, Kathleen." Any of you remember that? It's a very sad story. And I'd cry when she'd get to the part where the heroine dies. And she was rolling out the pie crust and whatnot. And all of a sudden she stopped singing and raised her hands to the ceiling, and her head tipped back, and she declared, "Oh, how I love my Lord Jesus." The greatest sermon I have ever heard. That has influenced my entire life. And I thought in my little 6-year-old mind, I'm not sure who the Lord Jesus is. There was no church. But we did have gospel study at home. And I thought, whoever he is, my grandma loves him. And if my grandma loves him, I love him too. And I want to testify to you tonight that I love my Lord Jesus.
Now you relate back to your past. Think about your grandmothers and your grandparents and your great-grandparents and what influence for good they had on you. And why you're the kind of a person that you are. You're good people or you wouldn't come to a lesson like this. I love my Lord and Savior Jesus Christ because of what my heritage is, my great people of the past. But these people hadn't been taught the story of American history that really happened. And let's see what the facts are here. Let's see here. I got to push this button right here. Oh, how I love my Lord Jesus. I'm thrilled that we can record that. And I'm going to give this to my posterity as Grandpa's testimony of our Savior. While that was going on, even during the same year, The socialist do-gooders around the world were trying to impose by force their will upon the other people. In Russia, they had what they called a revolutionary socialism. I remember many years ago as a researcher at the old Freeman Institute, we had a magazine called the Moscow News. I remember reading in the Moscow News by Peter Restov, historian Dr. Peter Restov, and he said, the greatest event ever to take place in the history of the world was the socialist revolution of 1917. Wow. Well, there's a picture of the socialist revolution of 1917. Notice he didn't call it a communist revolution. It was a socialist revolution. And it wasn't until after about 1917 they started to diverge all through the previous century. Red Republicans points out, the book Red Republicans, that socialism and communism were basically the same thing and the words were interchangeable. There was Christian communism, numerous different places tried it, didn't ever work. But now they found they were going to burn to the ground and build on the ashes. So this is what they did here. If you don't want socialism, we'll impose it upon you by force. If you don't want to be a part of the Union, we will impose it upon you by force. And the socialists flocked to the Northern Army. Socialism is what they wanted, as dreamed of by Karl Marx. Woodrow Wilson proclaimed, we need to go to war to make the world safe for democracy. You heard that phrase, haven't you? Yes, and Karl Marx declared, democracy is the first step to socialism. That's in the Communist Manifesto. Who would ever read that document? There are two ways to achieve socialism: revolution and evolution. This is a wonderful visual aid of evolutionary socialism. Evolutionary socialism in 1910. In 1910, this beautiful stained glass window was created in the home of Beatrice Webb in Surrey, England. It was in honor of the great movement and progress the socialists had made. They were delighted with their progress. Each part of the window has symbolic meaning. We have up here these men pounding on something. What are they pounding on? Over here we have a man pulling on a rope. What is he pulling on? Well, he is pulling on a rope, pumping a bellows, and they have a forge, and they have just taken this world out of the fire. This is all symbolic. The world has been heated. It's heated up to red hot. I am a blacksmith. I make my living doing this. I understand the process. They have heated this world up to red hot, but they're not going to destroy it with their big black hammers. No, up at the top is their slogan, remold it nearer to the heart's desire. You're just going to remold the world. That's what a blacksmith does. I beat on a piece of iron not to destroy it, but to change it to my heart's desire. Now down at the bottom, we have men worshiping. All but this man, he's not worshiping. What's he doing? Yeah, he's thumbing his nose. That's what he's doing. When they made this historic window, H.G. Wells was depicted accurately as thumbing his nose at the whole movement which they were carrying out. But the rest of them are worshiping, and what are they worshiping? They're worshiping a stack of books. They're worshiping the socialist literature. The top book is called Plays One Pleasant, written by George Bernard Shaw. The next book down, that is George Bernard Shaw right there. Plays Two Unpleasant. The third book down is called Plays for Puritans. Had a play for everybody. Do you think we could use the media, the theater, to help teach our socialist principles? Do you think Hollywood could use film to help present the message of central government? Yes. But down on the bottom is their foundation book, Fabian Tracts and Essays. Now, many years ago, before I had bald spots on top, and when I still had black hair, I read Fabian Tracts and Essays. And I'm going to show you my summary of 25 years ago. This is the summary. The major principles of socialism, as I listed them from Fabian Tracts and Essays. Government ownership or control of all land. Now the black part on there is federally withheld, or federally they claim federal ownership of it. And the white part is state and private land. This map is long out of date because every year the black increases in size. The federal government is continually acquiring new property to add to their holdings. A major principle of socialism in 1910, in Fabian Tracts and Essays, in England, that's where I'm quoting from, was government ownership or control of the land. Each one of these requires at least an hour. We'll give them each 10 seconds. This is the map of Nevada. The black is the land the federal government claims they own. The white is the land the state and private parties claim they own, and the number is no longer 87%. I'm told now it's 91%. Major principle of socialism: government ownership or control of major industry. Government control over labor. Government control or ownership of communications and transportation. Government control of all credit. We gave that in here last week as a lesson. Empire of debt. What has the government done to our money? Government control of all insurance. Medicare, Medicaid, workmen's compensation, Social Security. Government control of the educational system. Goals 2000. What a great program. Remember when President Ronald Reagan said, "We will abolish the Department of Education"? And instead they enhanced it, increased it, expanded it, and now it spends billions of dollars annually to influence and control the local schools. Elimination of the significance of the family. Elimination of the significance of religion. We're not going to eliminate religion, we'll just eliminate its significance. What are they doing here? Removing the 10 Commandments from the courthouse in Alabama. What a great American hero is Judge Roy Moore. Establishment of a minimum wage. We can't have the Great Society without having a minimum wage and raise it every year to help the poor. A universal system of pensions. Here we have Franklin Roosevelt signing the Social Security Act of 1936. Justified use of force if necessary to attain these socialistic goals. If you don't want the program, we will require that you take the program. If you fight, if you oppose it by force, we will use equal force. What's equal force mean? If I decide I don't want them like Ruby Ridge or Waco, Texas, or the Texas whatever, if I decide I don't want the government to come in and we have a battle, they kill me. That's what they do. That's where we are today. Now this one is not from Fabian Tracts and Essays. It's just a little bit from the Communist Manifesto. How will we pay for these programs? Karl Marx said, we need to impose a graduated income tax. And then we have down here, this is, at least it was when I took this slide, this is the director of the Internal Revenue Service, and in the news release he was saying, tell us where you are and we'll send you money. Isn't that wonderful? Aren't we about to receive more money? A great program of... Now, those are the principles of socialism in England in 1910. Do any of those sound familiar? Which one haven't we embraced? We'll take a close-up of that window. Right in between these two gentlemen, the two leaders here, George Bernard Shaw and Edward Pease, there is a coat of arms. Let's expand that and take a look at it. This is how they intend to accomplish their objectives. What is that? That's a wolf in sheep's clothing. That's how they intend to accomplish their objectives, like a wolf in a sheepskin. But then you can go to you can go Valery Giscard d'Estaing, pardon my French, the former president of France. He's presenting before the European Union leaders that are now writing, this is months ago, that were at that time about to write the European Constitution. He's presenting the symbol by which they can be inspired. He's sitting it out as a centerpiece on the table. A tortoise with a dragon's head. That's another symbol of socialism that the socialists use. So we have the wolf in a sheepskin. We have the tortoise with a dragon's head. But yet there's another one. One great scholar that I look to with high respect, named Marion Romney, likened it to the tentacles of an octopus and indicated to the degree that we allow those tentacles to entwine us, to that degree we cut ourselves off from the Spirit of the Lord. Socialism is not just bad, it's evil. It is the old deluder's counterfeit of the perfect law of liberty. My people are destroyed for lack of knowledge. 1943, Kashmir, Washington. Yes, that's me sitting on my father's lap. You can tell the level of prosperity that we're enjoying by the patch on his stocking. How many of you women are sewing patches on your husband's heels when they get holes in them? I was told later, my father said, we were poor then. I didn't know we were poor then. We had a wonderful life. We lived out in the country, we breathed fresh air, and every Christmas we got presents. And that was my first Christmas present. Now you liken this unto yourselves. You and your grandparents and your parents liken it unto yourselves. This was the Christmas I remember. I got a real saw. A real saw with teeth in it that would saw wood. It was a broken hacksaw with tape around the handle. My dad says we were poor then. I didn't know we were poor. I just knew I had a real saw. I'm not sure what my mother thought about it. These were the days when Christmas was a central issue around Jesus Christ, our Lord and Savior. It wasn't a gift giving with big gaudy gifts. These were the days when you hung your stocking by the chimney with care. Your stocking, not some gigantuous thing made of red and green velvet that held a bushel basket of candy. If you were 3 years old, you hung a 3-year-old stocking. And I remember every year somehow Santa Claus managed to force a tangerine into my 3-year-old stocking. What a marvelous experience, a tangerine! I'd never seen one before. And each year we got one tangerine. That was the budget. Wow. This is the first book I ever owned. Do you know where I got that book? You'll never guess. And when I told my dad about this lecture and what I was going to show, he said, well, Dad, Steve, I got one in the same place. They passed them out in school. Yes. When I was a boy, they passed the Bible out in public school. And after school, if you wanted, voluntarily, if you wanted, you could go and listen to a beautiful lady tell the stories of the Bible. I remember that. I don't know if she was really beautiful, but I remember that I had a beautiful feeling when I listened to this kind lady. What happened? What happened? Oh, these people are in a classroom also. These people are sitting in a classroom and they're doing something, but do they look like they fit in those little desks? No. Who do you suppose these people are? Who are they? They are legal immigrants. They are legal immigrants that came into the United States lawfully, and they have applied for citizenship, and they are in this classroom studying American history. My mother was one of them. Legally and lawfully, she came to the United States. She studied American history. She applied for citizenship. And we looked up in the records of that time period to see what she swore an oath to do. And she swore an oath to uphold and defend the Constitution against all enemies, both foreign and domestic. My mother did that. The first memory I had as a little boy was seeing my mother weeping. Now this is about that time period, but she's not weeping in this picture. But about that age in her life, she was holding a piece of paper in her hands, and the big tears were running down, and she was sobbing. And I was a little boy, and that stayed in my mind all these years. And I said, Mother, why are you crying? And she says, they killed my brother. My mother was just one from 50 million families who would mourn the loss of their loved ones. Many of your parents mourned the loss of their loved ones. This is her brother. He's the captain of a Lancaster bomber. This is the flight crew. They stay together. They stay together and they have a bonding. With other words, they don't shift them around each flight. They stay together and work together as a flight crew. They're flying a Lancaster bomber. They're flying it from England to Germany and back, non-stop, and dropping their bombs on Germany. It was called carpet bombing. Remember last lesson we had where we talked about the Christmas truce? Well, they didn't have a Christmas truce here. Carpet bombing means you dropped your bombs on the city and tried to destroy everything below. It was supposed to make the enemy feel like, there's no hope. All of our women and children and our buildings and our crops and our fields, everything good. This is the same strategy that Abraham Lincoln carried out through his leaders like Sherman and Sheridan and Grant. Total destruction. It's called total war. Robert E. Lee refused to do that. There's honor even in war. This is total destruction. And he was commanded to go and do that. On January the 22nd, 1944, he and his flight crew were shot down. The 17th bombing run. He had a brother. And when that brother, the day he got his wings to go fly in this war, was the day the telegraph man came to the door of the house and announced the death of this brother. The same day. What were they fighting for? Why were they there? The brother that wasn't shot down went back after the war because a man named Karl Koenig, a good German man, saw the airplane shot, saw the people coming down, picked up their dead bodies. Some of them shot while they were coming down in their parachutes, and he buried them and put a little wooden cross on each grave. And then the brother of the one that's in the ground went and met Karl Koenig to tell him thank you. Now your families go back, they have their own stories. Relate back to that era and ask yourself the question, why did 50 million people die? What was the cause? Oh, we say, we were fighting that tyrant Hitler. We were fighting to free the world from the villain Hitler. That's just as much nonsense as claiming we were fighting the Civil War to free the slaves or fighting the Civil War to save the Union. That's nonsense. That's mythical blather. 1945. We won, we said. We won. The Allied forces killed a rat while they nourished Frankenstein monsters. There's a Frankenstein monster on the right. We're here making negotiations and deals with the Frankenstein monster. Far worse than anything Hitler ever did was what Joseph Stalin did. Our president surely knew it. And he's there making deals, and they gave Stalin virtually everything he requested. Then when the President of the United States came back to report, he reported first to his cabinet and then to Congress, and I boiled it down in just a couple of sentences here. He reported, the Yalta Conference has laid the groundwork of a plan for a new world order. I found in Stalin's nature the way in which a Christian gentleman should behave. Stalin, that Christian gentleman, is our new partner for managing the world. Yes, this happened. This happened. Then in March, 1 month later, he goes on the air and declares, we can't do business with Stalin. He has broken every one of the promises he made at Yalta. A surprise. He already knew he was a murderous, lying villain. And then in April he died. April the 12th, Franklin Roosevelt died and passed it on to his successor, Harry Truman. Meanwhile, in April of 1945, and I just read the figures today, we promised hundreds of millions of dollars of aid to this murderous villain. Here, for example, we agreed to send more than 3,000 aircraft, 3,000 tanks, 9,000 jeeps, 16,000 weapon carriers, 41,436 trucks. England agreed to send fighter aircraft, tons of fuel and tons of rubber. But we won the war. We won the war. We conquered tyranny, we proclaimed. And then Stalin used what we aided him with And he conquered 700 million people. And many of them were executed and lived miserable, miserable lives of leading to death. But that was not all. In addition, the United States diplomatic decisions prepared the way for Mao Zedong to brutally subjugate hundreds of millions of people in China. If you read the story of Chiang Kai-shek and what took place there. This is heinous history and not fun. It's true. It happened. And now what will we do about it as we assimilate the truth, as we gain knowledge? My people are destroyed for lack of knowledge. My people have gone into captivity for lack of knowledge. A nation of well-informed men will be destroyed if they don't have knowledge, and that means women too. Men and women, male and female. Okay? Shift gears back to 1932. Alfred E. Smith, a great American. In 1932, he was helping Franklin Roosevelt. Well, let's back up to 1928. In 1928, Alfred E. Smith ran for President of the United States on the Democratic ticket. He had been governor of New York, and now the Democrats had chosen him as their leader. And he ran on a platform that was sound enough that if it were available today, I would vote for a Democrat if they would use the same platform that he had then. It's a beautiful platform. I went back. I got my friend to Google it up. I read the platform. Yes, Alfred E. Smith was a great person, and he ran on a good platform. He lost the election to Herbert Hoover, regretfully. 4 years later, he campaigned for Franklin Roosevelt. And Franklin Roosevelt made great promises, and he spoke constitutionally. I've got some great quotes that we've saved from that time period. And if you'll elect me, I'll follow the Constitution, and we'll do these things. And they were good and wholesome from the platform that he ran on. But 4 years later, Alfred E. Smith stood on January the 25th, 1936, and he gave a speech that you can Google up called The Betrayal of the Democratic Party. Or you can read it in the back of The Naked Communist. Capitalist, get the right book, The Naked Capitalist. The betrayal of the Democratic Party, in which he itemizes that Franklin Delano Roosevelt's administration massacred the Constitution, they completely abandoned it, and they betrayed the Democratic Party. That's what took place. Oh, what a relief. This is the end of the evening. I'm not going to tell you the rest of the story until tomorrow night. So tomorrow night, we'll tell what happened after the Democratic Party was betrayed. This story tonight was mild compared to what you'll hear tomorrow. Now, at the end of our lessons, we always try to find some relief from this hard history. One of the reliefs or efforts at relief is to sing a hymn together. I've chosen a hymn called The Firm Foundation. Since 1773, it has been included in almost every hymn book, a Christian hymn book. It was a favorite of Robert E. Lee. And one of the stories recounts when they were just getting ready to go into a big battle, and there were 2,000 men with Robert E. Lee camped out in the wilderness. Someone spontaneously started singing his favorite song. And then the whole group, 2,000 men, joined in. That must have been a beautiful, beautiful spirit experience right there as the 2,000 men prayed to God through a hymn. Let's stand now and sing. Now, this is not just any old hymn. This is a famous historic hymn. And it's not to the same tune that some of you think it will be. You will also discover a few different words. And we have a pianist over there that's going to play it for us. Go ahead and play a line. Let them hear what's happening. By the way, they also sang this in Cuba. In 1898, the 7th Army Corps sang the hymn spontaneously. I believe that was Christmas Eve or Christmas Day. And I wondered how big a corps was. And I looked in the encyclopedia, and it suggested 35,000 men. So we have this huge group, and they start singing. How firm a foundation, the old words to it. Now, we sing it to the tune, "O come all ye faithful." Yes, it's the Christmas carol, the tune, and it was originally the tune of this particular set of words. So go ahead and play us a line, and then we'll start singing. I've got words that'll come on the screen. How firm a foundation, ye saints of the Lord, is laid for your faith in His excellent word. What more ye say than to you He did, to you who for refuge, to you who for refuge, to you who for refuge, to Jesus have fled. Fear not, I am with thee. Oh, be not dismayed, for I am thy God. I will still give thee aid. I'll strengthen thee, help thee, and cause thee to stand, upheld by my gracious, upheld by my gracious, upheld by my gracious, omnipotent hand. When through the deep waters I call thee to go, the rivers of sorrow shall not overflow. For I will be with thee, thy trials to bless, and sanctify to thee, and sanctify to thee, and sanctify to thee thy deepest distress. That soul that on Jesus hath leaned for repose, I will not desert to his foes. That soul, all hell should endeavor to shake, I'll never, no, never, I'll never, no, never, I'll never, no, never, no, never forsake. I wished you'd all had a microphone in front of you so they could have gotten everyone's sound. We'll turn the time back over to our chairman and anyone brave enough to hear the concluding lesson tomorrow night at 7 o'clock in this room.
Thank you so much, Stephen. Do I have a volunteer to say the closing prayer this evening? Thank you. Hold this right up.
Okay. Our kind Father, we thank Thee for the privilege of coming here and joining our minds and hearts as we seek to know the truth. We are thankful, dear Father, for the privilege we have of being in a nation where we can gather and hear the truth. May our hearts and minds be open to the same, that we might be able to stand for freedom and have the Spirit of the Lord to be with us. May we prepare spiritually for that which is to come and be welcoming of Thy Spirit. Bless and strengthen us in thy service, we pray. And we thank thee for this hour. In the name of Jesus Christ, amen.